The October sun cast long shadows across the Oklahoma plains as Garth Brooks pulled his black Ford pickup through the rusted gates of what had once been a thriving farm. The hinges groaned in protest, their metal corroded by years of neglect and prairie storms. Dust kicked up from the gravel drive as he slowly made his way toward the weathered farmhouse that sat like a lonely sentinel in the distance. Garth cut the engine and sat for a moment, taking in the scene before him. The realtor, Janet Morrison, had warned him about the property's condition, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. The white paint on the two-story farmhouse had faded to a dull gray, and several shutters hung at odd angles. The wraparound porch that had once been a welcoming sight now sagged under the weight of accumulated debris and fallen branches. "Well, old girl," Garth murmured to himself, his Oklahoma drawl thick with contemplation. "You've seen better days, haven't you?" He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. The autumn air carried the scent of dying grass and the distant promise of rain. Somewhere in the overgrown fields, a meadowlark called out, its song the only sound breaking the profound silence that seemed to blanket the entire property. The farm sprawled across 200 acres of rolling hills and pasture land, bordered by old oak trees that stood like weathered guardians. In the distance, Garth could make out the skeletal remains of a red barn, its roof partially collapsed and its walls listing dangerously to one side. Closer to the house, a windmill stood motionless, its blades frozen in time. Janet Morrison emerged from her silver sedan, her heels clicking against the gravel as she approached. A woman in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a business suit that seemed out of place in the rural setting, she carried a thick folder of documents. "I know it doesn't look like much right now, Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice carrying the practiced optimism of someone who had spent decades in real estate. "But with your resources and vision, this place could be absolutely stunning. The bones are good, solid foundation, quality construction from the 1940s. They built things to last back then." Garth nodded, but his attention was already wandering to the details that spoke of lives once lived here. A child's bicycle lay on its side near the porch steps, its red paint faded but still visible beneath the rust. A rope swing hung from one of the oak trees, its seat weathered smooth by countless hands. These weren't just the remnants of a property. They were the echoes of a family's dreams and daily routines. "Tell me about the previous owners," Garth said, his eyes scanning the property with growing interest. Janet consulted her folder, flipping through several pages. "The Henderson family owned it for over 30 years. Sarah Henderson was the last owner. She passed away about 5 years ago, and the property has been tied up in estate proceedings ever since. Her children, well, they're scattered across the country now. None of them wanted to keep the farm." "What happened to them? The family, I mean?" Janet's expression grew more somber. "It's a sad story, really. Sarah's husband died in a farming accident when their children were young. She raised 3 kids on her own, kept the farm running for years. But toward the end, she got sick. Cancer. The medical bills, combined with the drought years in the early 2010s, well, it was more than the farm could bear." Garth felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he got when he heard stories that would later become songs. There was something about this place, something beyond the obvious appeal of owning land, where he could escape the pressures of fame and find creative inspiration. This was a place where real people had lived real lives, had faced real struggles. "Can I look inside?" he asked. Janet produced a set of keys from her purse. "Of course. Just be careful. Some of the floorboards might be loose, and the electricity has been shut off for years." The front door opened with a prolonged creak, revealing an interior that time had claimed but not destroyed. Dust motes danced in the streams of sunlight filtering through dirty windows, and the air held the musty smell of abandonment. But beneath it all, Garth could sense the warmth that had once filled these rooms. The living room was spacious, with hardwood floors that, despite years of neglect, showed signs of quality craftsmanship. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth blackened from countless winter fires. Above the mantel, the outline of a removed picture was visible on the faded wallpaper, a ghost of family memories taken away when the house was emptied. Garth walked slowly through the rooms, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The kitchen still held the basics: cabinets with glass doors, a farmhouse sink beneath a window that looked out over the fields, and a breakfast nook where a family had once gathered for morning coffee and conversation. On the windowsill above the sink, a small ceramic planter sat empty, its soil long since dried and blown away. "The upstairs has 4 bedrooms," Janet said, following him as he explored. Sarah used one as her office, where she kept the farm's books and correspondence. The children's rooms? Well, you can still see some of the personality they had. The family left some things behind. Nothing valuable, just personal items that didn't seem worth moving. As they climbed the creaking stairs, Garth found himself wondering about those children. What had it been like for them, growing up on this isolated farm with a mother who was fighting to keep their world intact? How many nights had they fallen asleep to the sound of wind through the wheat fields? How many mornings had they woken to the smell of breakfast cooking downstairs? The first bedroom they entered was clearly a young girl's room. The walls were painted a soft pink, and despite the years of emptiness, he could still see the marks on the walls where posters had once hung. A dresser stood against one wall, its mirror cloudy with age and neglect. The second room was smaller, painted blue with baseball pennants still tacked to the walls. A desk sat beneath the window, and on it, barely visible beneath a layer of dust, were scattered sheets of paper covered with the scribblings of a child practicing their letters. The third room was different. Larger than the others, it had clearly belonged to an older child or teenager. The walls were a neutral beige, and the furniture was more mature. A double bed, a larger desk, and a bookshelf that still held a few forgotten volumes. But what caught Garth's attention was the guitar case leaning against the wall in the corner. "Was one of the children a musician?" he asked, nodding toward the case. Janet looked surprised, as if she hadn't noticed it before. I'm not sure. The family didn't leave much information about the children's interests. You could probably ask around town. People in small communities usually know everything about everyone." Garth approached the guitar case and, after a moment's hesitation, opened it. Inside was an acoustic guitar, its finish faded, but its construction solid. It was a Yamaha, nothing fancy, but the kind of instrument that had been well loved and frequently played. The strings were loose and would need replacing, but the guitar itself appeared to be in good condition. He lifted it carefully from the case, noting the wear marks on the top, where a pick had been used countless times, the slight depression in the wood where someone's arm had rested while playing. On the back of the headstock, carved in small, careful letters, was the name Marcus. "Marcus Henderson," Garth said quietly, more to himself than to Janet. "What was that?" One of the children was named Marcus, and he played guitar. Janet made a note in her folder. "I can look into the family's current contact information if you're interested. Sometimes new buyers like to reach out to previous owners, especially when there are sentimental items left behind." Garth nodded, but his attention was already elsewhere. He was imagining a teenage boy sitting by the window in this room, learning to play, dreaming of stages and crowds, and a life beyond the boundaries of the family farm. He wondered what had happened to Marcus Henderson. whether his musical dreams had survived the dissolution of his childhood home. The fourth bedroom had clearly been Sarah Henderson's office. A desk still held stacks of papers, bills, correspondence with banks, medical statements from various doctors and hospitals. It was the paperwork of a life slowly falling apart, a woman's desperate attempts to hold on to the land that had been her family's anchor for decades. Garth felt like he was intruding on private grief, but he couldn't help but notice the pattern in the documents. Hospital bills that grew larger over time, loan applications that had been rejected, letters from the bank about mortgage payments that were increasingly overdue. It was the documentation of a woman fighting a battle she couldn't win, trying to protect her children's inheritance while facing her own mortality. "She fought hard," Janet said quietly, noticing his attention to the papers. "From what I heard around town, Sarah Henderson was one of those people who never gave up. Even when the cancer diagnosis came, even when the medical bills started piling up, she kept trying to find a way to save the farm." "What happened to the kids after she died?" "They scattered. I think one moved to California, another to Texas. The youngest one, that might be your Marcus. I believe he went to Nashville. They tried to keep the property for a while, thinking maybe one of them would come back and work the land, but..." She gestured around the empty house. "Sometimes dreams and reality don't align." As they walked back downstairs, Garth found himself thinking about his own journey from small-town Oklahoma to Nashville, the struggles and sacrifices that had marked his path to success. How many other young musicians had made that same journey, carrying nothing but talent and hope? And how many had found success as elusive as Sarah Henderson had found financial stability? The tour concluded back on the front porch, where Garth stood looking out over the overgrown fields. Despite the property's condition, he could envision what it might become with care and investment. The fields could be restored, the barn rebuilt, the house returned to its former warmth and welcoming character. But more than the potential for renovation, he felt drawn to the stories that lingered in every corner of the property. "I'd like to make an offer," he told Janet, surprising even himself with the decisiveness in his voice. "Wonderful. The asking price is reasonable, given the amount of work needed, and I think we can negotiate favorable terms. When would you like to schedule a home inspection?" "Oh, soon," Garth replied, but his mind was already working beyond the practical details of the purchase. "Janet, you mentioned that you might be able to find contact information for the Henderson children. I'd really appreciate that, especially for Marcus." "Of course. It might take a few days, but I should be able to track them down through the estate attorney. Is there a particular reason you want to contact them?" Garth looked back at the house, imagining the guitar that still sat in that upstairs bedroom, the dreams that had once filled these rooms. "Sometimes," he said, "when you buy more than just property, you inherit some responsibility for the stories that came before." As Janet packed up her documents and prepared to leave, Garth remained on the porch, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. The meadowlark called again, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint sound of traffic on the county highway. But mostly, the world was quiet, filled with the kind of peace that money couldn't buy, but that sometimes, if you were lucky, you could find waiting for you in places like this. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found his manager's number. The conversation would be brief. Inform his team that he was buying property in Oklahoma, that he'd be spending more time there in the coming months, that some upcoming appearances might need to be rescheduled. The business side of his life was always waiting, always demanding attention. But for now, standing on this forgotten porch in the gathering dusk, Garth Brooks felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt like he was home. 3 weeks later, Garth returned to the Henderson farm with a truck full of supplies and a head full of plans. The property was officially his now, and he'd spent the intervening weeks researching contractors, planning renovations, and thinking about the guitar he'd found in Marcus Henderson's room. The October air had grown crisper, and the first hard frost of the season had touched the overgrown gardens, leaving the remnants of what had once been Sarah Henderson's vegetable patch brown and brittle. Garth had arrived early, before the contractors were scheduled to begin their assessment of the house's structural needs, wanting some quiet time to explore the property more thoroughly. He'd brought a thermos of coffee and was sitting on the front porch steps when he noticed movement near the old oak tree at the edge of the yard. An elderly man was walking slowly across the field, using a walking stick to navigate the uneven ground. As he drew closer, Garth could see that he was probably in his 70s, wearing overalls and a faded blue work shirt, with a face weathered by decades of outdoor work. "Morning," the man called out as he approached. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion. I'm William Patterson, Bill to most folks. I live on the adjoining property, about a quarter mile through those trees." Garth stood and walked down the steps to meet him. Garth Brooks, and no intrusion at all. "I'm glad to meet a neighbor." Bill's eyes widened slightly with recognition, but he quickly composed himself with the kind of dignity that Garth had learned to appreciate in rural communities. These were people who valued substance over celebrity, who judged a man by his character rather than his fame. "Well, I'll be," Bill said, shaking Garth's hand with a grip that was still strong despite his age. "Sarah always said this place would attract someone special someday. Guess she was right." "You knew Sarah Henderson well?" "Knew the whole family for 30 years, Bill replied, his voice carrying the weight of long friendship. "Sarah was, well, she was something special. Toughest woman I ever knew. And I've known a few tough women in my time." Bill looked around the property with the appraising eye of someone who had watched it change over the decades. She used to keep this place like a picture postcard. Gardens that would make you weep. They were so beautiful. That barn over there, he pointed to the collapsed structure in the distance, used to house the finest Angus cattle in the county. What happened to change all that? Bill's expression grew somber. "Life happened, son. Life and circumstances, and a world that doesn't always reward good people with good fortune." He paused, seemingly deciding how much to share. "Mind if I sit a spell? These old bones don't carry me as far as they used to." They settled on the porch steps, and Bill began to tell the story that Garth had been wanting to hear since his first visit to the property. "Sarah came here as a young bride in 1985, Bill began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a man who had told this story before, probably to himself on many lonely evenings. She and her husband, David, bought this place when they were barely 25 years old. David had grown up on a farm in Kansas, and Sarah was a city girl from Tulsa who fell in love with both the man and the idea of rural life. They were happy as any couple I ever knew. Sarah threw herself into farm life like she was born to it. Learned to milk cows, raise chickens, grow vegetables. David was a natural farmer, had an instinct for the land and the animals. By 1990, they had their first child, Rebecca. Then came Thomas in 1992 and Marcus in 1995. Bill's eyes grew distant as he remembered. Marcus was the baby, and he was different from the other two. Rebecca was practical like her mother, and Thomas was serious like his father. But Marcus, that boy was pure music from the day he could talk. Always humming, always tapping out rhythms on whatever surface he could find. When did he start playing guitar? Must have been around 12 or 13. Sarah bought him that guitar for his birthday one year, even though money was tight. She used to joke that it was the best and worst investment she ever made. Best because it kept him happy and out of trouble. Worst because he played it from dawn to dusk, and drove everyone in the house half crazy with his practicing. Garth smiled, remembering his own early days with a guitar. The hours spent in his childhood bedroom working through chord progressions and dreaming of stages. But the music wasn't just a hobby for Marcus, Bill continued. Even as a kid, you could see he had something special. He'd play at the county fair, at church gatherings, anywhere people would listen. By the time he was in high school, he was writing his own songs. Good songs, too. The kind that made you stop what you were doing and really listen. What happened to David? Bill's expression darkened. Accident during harvest season, 1999. Combine harvester malfunction. Mechanical failure that caught him in the machinery. Marcus was only 4 years old. Rebecca was 14. Thomas was 7. The stark simplicity of the statement carried more weight than any elaborate description could have. Garth had heard similar stories throughout rural America, understood the reality of farming life where mechanical equipment and dangerous work were daily constants. Sarah could have sold the farm then, Bill said. A lot of people expected her to. Young widow with 3 kids and no experience running a farming operation by herself. But she was determined to keep the land for her children, to honor David's memory by maintaining what he'd built. How did she manage? Pure determination and help from neighbors like me. Sarah learned to operate machinery that most grown men found challenging. She worked 18-hour days during planting and harvest seasons. The kids helped as much as they could, but they were still children. Marcus, especially. He was too young to be much help with the heavy work, so he spent a lot of time alone. And that's when his music really developed. Bill pointed toward the upstairs window of what Garth now knew had been Marcus's room. Summer evenings, you could hear that guitar from our property. Marcus would sit by that window and play for hours. Sometimes Sarah would join him on the porch with her own voice. She had a beautiful voice, though she was too modest to let many people hear it. Those were peaceful moments in what became increasingly difficult years. The farm started struggling. Several factors came together in the worst possible way. The drought years in the early 2010s hit everyone hard. But Sarah was already operating on thin margins. Then, the medical bills started. Bill's voice became quieter, more careful. Sarah was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2012. She fought it hard, went through all the treatments, but the medical costs were astronomical. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket expenses were more than the farm could bear. She took out loans against the property, then more loans to pay the first loans. Where were the children during all this? Rebecca had finished college and was living in California, working as a teacher. She sent money when she could, but she was raising her own family by then. Thomas joined the military right out of high school. Army, I think. Good, steady path for a young man, but it meant he wasn't here to help with the farm. And Marcus, Bill paused, choosing his words carefully. Marcus was the dreamer, talented as hell, but not cut out for farming life. As soon as he graduated high school, he was determined to go to Nashville and make it in the music business. Sarah supported his dreams, even though she could have used his help keeping the farm going. Did she ask him to stay? That's not who Sarah was. She'd spent too many years sacrificing for her children to ask them to sacrifice their dreams for the farm. But I know it broke her heart a little when Marcus left in 2013. Not because she resented his choice, but because she knew she was running out of time and options. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the wind move through the overgrown grass in the fields. Garth was beginning to understand the full weight of the story contained within these abandoned acres. When did she lose the farm? Officially, about 6 months before she died in 2018. The bank had been patient, given her circumstances and her history in the community. But eventually the numbers just didn't work anymore. Sarah moved into a small apartment in town for her final months. The kids tried to buy the property back from the bank, but they were asking market value, and none of the children had that kind of money available. What about Marcus? Did he find success in Nashville? Bill shrugged. Last I heard, he was still there, still trying to make it work. Rebecca keeps in touch with me occasionally, sends Christmas cards, that sort of thing. She mentioned that Marcus was playing in bars and clubs, writing songs for other artists sometimes, but nothing big had broken for him yet. That was a couple years ago, though. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation. 2 trucks were coming up the gravel drive, the contractors Garth had hired to assess the property's renovation needs. As the trucks parked and men began unloading equipment and clipboards, Bill started to stand. "I should let you get to your business," he said. "But Mr. Brooks, Garth, I want you to know that Sarah would have been happy to know someone like you ended up with this place. She always believed that good things come to good people, even if it sometimes takes longer than we'd like." Bill, wait. Garth stood as well. "Do you happen to know how I might get in touch with Marcus? I'd like to talk to him about the guitar and, well, just about the property in general." Bill nodded thoughtfully. "I don't have his contact information, but Rebecca might. She's Rebecca Martinez now, lives in Sacramento. I can ask her to reach out to you if you'd like. Or if you want to contact her directly, she teaches at Roosevelt Elementary School there." "I'd appreciate that very much." As Bill walked back across the field toward his own property, Garth watched him go and thought about the layers of story that existed in places like this. Every piece of land had a history. Every building held memories. But some places seemed to hold more than their share of human experience. The contractors approached with their professional assessments and practical concerns. Foundation stability, electrical systems, plumbing, roof integrity. For the next 3 hours, Garth listened to estimates and timelines, made decisions about preservation versus replacement, and slowly began to see a path from the property's current state to what it might become. But even as he discussed square footage and load-bearing walls, part of his mind was elsewhere, wondering about Marcus Henderson and whether a young musician in Nashville had any idea that his childhood home was being restored by someone who understood both the value of dreams and the weight of the past. That evening, back in his hotel room in Oklahoma City, Garth called his assistant and asked her to research contact information for Rebecca Martinez in Sacramento. Then he sat by the window, looking out at the city lights, and found himself humming a melody that seemed to have emerged from somewhere deep in his memory. It was the beginning of a song, though he didn't know it yet. A song about family farms and lost dreams, about children who grow up and move away, and about the way some places hold on to love long after the people who created it have gone. The phone call to Rebecca Martinez took place on a rainy Thursday afternoon in November. Garth had been working with contractors for 2 weeks, watching as they slowly brought the Henderson farmhouse back to life with new electrical systems and structural reinforcements. But he'd been thinking more and more about the family that had once called this place home. Rebecca's voice carried the careful politeness of a schoolteacher who had been interrupted during her lunch break. But when Garth explained who he was and why he was calling, her tone warmed considerably. "Mr. Brooks, this is, well, it's certainly unexpected," she said. "Bill Patterson mentioned that someone had bought the farm, but I had no idea it was you. Mom was a huge fan of your music. She always said you sang about real life, about people like us." "I hope you don't mind me reaching out," Garth said. "I'm trying to understand the history of the property, and I found some personal items that were left behind. I wanted to make sure they got to the right people." "Personal items?" "There's a guitar in what I assume was Marcus's room. A Yamaha acoustic. with his name carved into the headstock. And there are family photographs scattered throughout the house, some documents and letters that seem important. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. We had to pack up so quickly when Mom moved out. The bank gave us just 2 weeks to get everything we wanted. And there was so much. 30 years of family life doesn't fit easily into moving boxes. We probably left more than we took. Would you like me to ship the guitar to Marcus? I'd be happy to cover the cost. That's very kind of you, Mr. Brooks. But honestly, I'm not sure Marcus would want it back. He's been struggling in Nashville, and I think reminders of the farm might be more painful than helpful right now. Garth frowned, sensing there was more to the story. Is he doing okay? Rebecca sighed, and Garth could hear the weight of sibling concern in her voice. Marcus has talent, real talent, but Nashville is a tough town, and he's been there for almost 10 years without a major break. He's been playing in clubs, writing songs for other people, taking odd jobs to pay rent. Last time we talked, he sounded discouraged. Does he know about the farm being sold? I told him when it first went on the market, but he didn't seem interested in the details. I think it's too hard for him to think about. That place represented everything he was trying to get away from. Small town life, limited opportunities, the struggle of watching Mom fight to keep something that was already slipping away. Garth walked to the window of the farmhouse kitchen, looking out over the fields where contractors were beginning to repair the old fencing. Rebecca, would it be possible for me to get Marcus's contact information? I'd like to talk to him directly. May I ask why? I don't mean to be protective, but Marcus has been hurt by a lot of false promises and disappointments. If this is about charity or pity, it's not about charity, Garth interrupted gently. It's about understanding. This property means something to me beyond just owning land. Your family's story is part of what makes this place special, and I think Marcus might be able to help me understand how to honor that properly. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was cautious but hopeful. He's working at a music store during the day, Carter's Vintage Guitars on Music Row. He plays at the Bluebird Cafe sometimes, usually Thursday nights when they have open mic sessions. Mr. Brooks, Garth, if you do decide to contact him, please be patient with him. He's not the same confident kid who left home with a guitar and a head full of dreams. After ending the call with Rebecca, Garth spent the afternoon walking through the farmhouse, seeing it with new understanding. In the living room, he found a family photo that had fallen behind a radiator. Sarah Henderson surrounded by her 3 children at what looked like a Christmas celebration. Marcus couldn't have been more than 16, holding his guitar with the kind of casual confidence that suggested it was never far from his hands. The photo made the house feel less empty, somehow. These weren't just rooms being renovated. They were spaces where a family had celebrated holidays, weathered storms, faced challenges together. The kitchen table where contracts now sat had once held homework assignments and family dinners. The living room where contractors now discussed floor plans had once echoed with Marcus's guitar practice and Sarah's gentle corrections of his technique. That evening, Garth made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of driving back to his hotel in Oklahoma City, he called his manager and cleared his schedule for the next several days. Then he threw some clothes in a bag and drove straight through the night to Nashville, arriving at his apartment in Belle Meade just as the sun was rising over Music City. He spent Friday morning making phone calls, rearranging meetings, and explaining to his team that he needed a few days to handle personal business. His assistant, used to Garth's occasional impulsive decisions, simply updated his calendar and arranged for a driver to be available if needed. Carter's Vintage Guitars was located in a narrow building on 16th Avenue, squeezed between a recording studio and a coffee shop that catered to the music industry crowd. The storefront was cluttered with instruments of every description: guitars, mandolins, banjos, fiddles, and several items that Garth couldn't immediately identify. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and from somewhere in the back of the store, a voice called out, "Be right with you." Garth browsed the instruments while he waited, noting the careful attention to detail in the store's organization. Every guitar was properly maintained, the strings were fresh, and small handwritten tags provided information about each instrument's history and characteristics. This was a place run by someone who understood and respected music, not just someone trying to make a sale. "Sorry about the wait. Can I help you find anything specific?" Garth turned around and found himself face to face with a young man who was unmistakably Marcus Henderson. The resemblance to the family photo was strong, though 10 years and the struggles of pursuing a music career had added lines around his eyes and a wariness to his expression that hadn't been there in the Christmas picture. Marcus was tall and lean, with sandy brown hair that needed a haircut, and hands that showed the calluses of someone who played guitar for hours every day. He wore a flannel shirt over a vintage concert t-shirt, and his jeans had the worn patches that came from years of wear rather than designer distressing. "Marcus?" Garth said, and watched the young man's face change as recognition set in. Oh, wow. You're—" Marcus paused, clearly struggling with the unexpected encounter. "Mr. Brooks? What are you doing here? I was hoping we could talk. Is there somewhere we could sit down for a few minutes?" Marcus glanced around the store nervously. "I'm working right now. My boss is at a guitar show in Atlanta, but I can't really leave the store unattended. What time do you get off work?" 6 o'clock. "But Mr. Brooks, I don't understand why you'd want to talk to me. I mean, I'm flattered, but—" Garth held up a hand to interrupt. "It's about the farm, Marcus. Your family's farm. I bought it." The color drained from Marcus's face, and he reached for the edge of a display case to steady himself. "You bought— what? Why?" "That's what I'd like to explain. What do you say I come back at 6 and we can go get some coffee and talk?" Marcus nodded slowly, still looking shell-shocked. "There's a place called Dose of Reality about 2 blocks down. It's usually quiet in the evenings. I'll see you there at 6:30 then." Garth spent the rest of the afternoon driving around Nashville, revisiting places that had been important in his own journey from unknown songwriter to country music superstar. The city had changed enormously since his early days, but the core of Music Row remained recognizable. Still the place where dreams were made and broken, where talent met opportunity or crashed against the rocks of an unforgiving industry. Dose of Reality was exactly the kind of coffee shop that attracted struggling musicians. Mismatched furniture, local artwork on the walls, and coffee strong enough to fuel late-night writing sessions. When Garth arrived at 6:30, Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee, looking like a man preparing for a difficult conversation. "I got you black coffee," Marcus said, as Garth sat down. "Seemed like a safe choice." "Perfect, thank you." Garth took a sip and studied the young man across from him. "Marcus, I want to start by saying that I didn't seek you out because I feel sorry for you or because I think you need rescuing. I contacted you because I think you can help me understand something important." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What could I possibly help you understand?" "How to do right by your family's land. How to honor what your mother built there without erasing the memory of what came before." For a long moment, Marcus stared down at his coffee cup, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Brooks, Garth, that farm took everything from my family. My father died working that land. My mother killed herself trying to keep it. It represents every dream that didn't come true, every sacrifice that didn't matter in the end. Why would you want to honor that? Because, Garth said quietly, those dreams and sacrifices are exactly what made that land special. Your family didn't fail, Marcus. The circumstances failed them. There's a big difference. Marcus shook his head. You don't understand. I watched my mother work 18-hour days to keep that place running. I watched her take on debt she couldn't afford, skip medical treatments she needed, postpone her own dreams so my brother and sister and I could have opportunities she never had. And in the end, none of it mattered. The bank took it anyway. But it did matter, Garth insisted. Your mother raised 3 children who all went on to build their own lives. Rebecca became a teacher. Thomas serves his country in the military. And you're here in Nashville chasing a dream that she supported even when it meant losing your help on the farm. That's not failure. That's success of the most important kind. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing Garth's words. Finally, he asked, "What do you plan to do with the property?" "Restore it. Bring it back to what it was when your family was there. The house, the barn, the fields. But I also want to do something more than that." Garth leaned forward, his voice taking on the intensity that characterized his most important conversations. "I want to create something that honors your mother's memory and supports other families who are facing similar struggles." Marcus looked skeptical. "What do you mean?" "I'm still working out the details, but I'm thinking about establishing some kind of foundation or program that helps family farmers who are dealing with medical crises or other emergencies that threaten their ability to keep their land. Use the farm as a base of operations, maybe offer temporary housing for families who need support, provide resources for agricultural recovery. That's..." Marcus paused, clearly surprised by the scope of Garth's vision. "That's not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. That you wanted a private retreat, a place to escape from the pressures of fame. Most celebrities who buy rural property want privacy and seclusion." Garth smiled. "I do want some of that. But I also want the land to serve a purpose beyond my own needs. Your mother spent her life trying to help her family and her community. It seems right to continue that tradition." Marcus stared out the coffee shop window at the Nashville traffic, his expression unreadable. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Why does this matter to you? You have more money than most people could spend in several lifetimes. You could buy any property you wanted, anywhere in the world. Why get involved in the struggles of people you don't even know?" Garth considered the question carefully. "Because I remember what it was like before all this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing his fame and success. "I remember being a young man with a guitar and a lot of dreams, not sure if I'd ever be able to make a living doing what I loved. I remember the people who helped me along the way, who believed in me when I didn't have much reason to believe in myself." He paused, thinking about his own journey from Oklahoma clubs to global stardom. "Success isn't just about talent, Marcus. It's about opportunity, timing, and having people who support you when things get difficult. Your mother gave you that support, even when it cost her. Now maybe it's time for someone else to provide that kind of support to other families. And you think I can help with this somehow? I think you understand the struggles that rural families face better than I do. You've lived it. And I think your perspective could be valuable in making sure we create something that actually helps people, rather than just making me feel good about myself." Marcus was quiet again, and Garth could see him wrestling with emotions and possibilities he hadn't considered before. Finally, he said, "I need to tell you something about why I really left the farm." "Okay." "It wasn't just about pursuing music. It was also about running away from failure." Marcus's voice became quieter, more vulnerable. "The last few years before Mom got sick, I could see what was happening to the farm. The financial pressure, the stress she was under, the way she was aging faster than she should have been. And I felt helpless to change any of it. You were just a teenager, Marcus. But I was the one who was supposed to take over eventually. Dad always talked about the farm being passed down through generations, about how each generation would improve it and make it stronger. Instead, I was the generation that let it slip away. Garth leaned back in his chair, understanding now why Marcus had been so resistant to discussing the farm. Is that what you really think? That you failed your family? Didn't I? Rebecca became a teacher. Thomas joined the military. They both found ways to contribute to the world. I ran off to Nashville to chase a dream that hasn't exactly worked out the way I planned. How long have you been in Nashville? Almost 10 years. And in those 10 years, what have you accomplished? Marcus looked surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean, what have you done here? What have you learned? What have you contributed? Marcus thought for a moment. I've written about 300 songs. About 50 of them have been recorded by other artists. Nothing major. Mostly independent releases or album tracks. I've played thousands of shows. Everything from coffee houses to honky-tonks. I've learned the business side of music, publishing, royalties, how the industry really works. That doesn't sound like failure to me. That sounds like someone who's been building a career, learning a craft, paying dues. But I'm still working in a guitar shop to pay rent. I'm 33 years old, and I'm no closer to a record deal than I was when I arrived. Garth smiled. Marcus, I was 37 when I got my first record deal. I spent years playing in clubs, working odd jobs, getting rejected by record labels who said my music was too country for pop radio and too pop for country radio. The music business doesn't work on anyone's timeline, but its own. Really? Really. And more importantly, success isn't just about record deals and radio play. You've been creating music for 10 years, contributing to other artists' work, building relationships in the industry. That's valuable, whether it's led to fame or not. Marcus absorbed this information, and Garth could see some of the tension leaving his shoulders. So what exactly are you proposing? In terms of the farm, I mean. I'd like you to come back to Oklahoma with me. See the property as it is now. Help me understand what it meant to your family, and give me your thoughts on how we might create something that honors your mother's legacy while also serving a practical purpose. I can't just leave Nashville. I have responsibilities here, and I'm not asking you to leave permanently, just for a week or two. Help me get this foundation idea off the ground, and then you can return to Nashville with a clearer sense of what your family's land is becoming. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring down at his coffee cup as if it might contain answers to questions he'd been asking himself for years. Finally, he looked up and met Garth's eyes. What would I tell my boss? What would I tell the people who book me for shows? Tell them you're consulting on a project that could change your life. Which is the truth? And if I hate being back there? If it brings up too many painful memories? Then you come back to Nashville, and I find another way to move forward with the project. But Marcus, avoiding painful memories doesn't make them go away. Sometimes the only way to heal from something is to face it directly. Marcus nodded slowly. When would you want to do this? As soon as possible. The renovation work is progressing quickly, and I'd like to have your input before we get too far along. I could probably get a week off work. My boss owes me some time anyway. Marcus paused, then added, but I want to be clear about something. I'm not looking for charity or handouts. If I'm going to help with this project, I want to contribute something meaningful, not just be there because you feel sorry for me. Understood. And Marcus, I don't feel sorry for you. I see a talented musician who's been working hard to build a career in a difficult industry, and someone who has insights about rural life and family farming that could be invaluable to this project. They shook hands across the coffee shop table, and Garth felt the same sense of rightness that he'd experienced when he first saw the Henderson farm. This wasn't just about buying property or creating a charitable foundation. This was about connecting past and present, about honoring the dreams of one generation while creating opportunities for the next. As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, Marcus said, "Mr. Brooks, Garth, can I ask you one more question?" "Of course. Do you really think my mother would approve of what you're planning?" Garth thought about Bill Patterson's stories, about the woman who had fought so hard to preserve her family's land and future. "Marcus, from everything I've heard about your mother, I think she'd be proud that her land is going to continue serving families who need support. I think she'd be proud that her son is going to be part of making that happen." Marcus nodded, and for the first time since Garth had met him, he smiled with something that looked like hope. The drive from Nashville to Oklahoma took Marcus Henderson through a landscape of memories he'd spent 10 years trying to forget. As he followed Garth Brooks's black pickup truck along Interstate 40, then north through smaller highways toward the farm, he found himself noticing details that his 18-year-old self had been too eager to leave behind. The way the light changed as the urban sprawl gave way to open fields, the rhythmic pattern of fence posts and farm gates, the distinctive red soil of eastern Oklahoma that had stained his childhood clothes and marked his family's struggles. It was late November now, and the countryside wore the muted colors of approaching winter. The cotton fields were brown stubble, the wheat was winter dormant, and the oak trees held onto their last leaves with the tenacity of things that knew they had to endure months of cold before spring returned. Marcus had driven this route in reverse when he left for Nashville in 2013, his Yamaha guitar and a duffel bag of clothes in the back seat of a used Honda Civic that had belonged to his mother. He'd been so focused on the future then, so certain that success was waiting for him in Music City, that he'd barely looked in the rearview mirror as the familiar landmarks of his childhood disappeared behind him. Now, approaching those same landmarks from the opposite direction, he was struck by how much smaller everything seemed. The town of Colgate, where he'd gone to high school, looked like it had lost population and businesses since his departure. The Dairy Queen, where he'd worked summer jobs, was closed, its parking lot cracked and overgrown with weeds. The movie theater, where he'd taken Amanda Morrison to see Titanic during his senior year, was now a used furniture store. But as they turned onto the county highway that led to his family's farm, Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotions he thought he'd successfully buried. The landscape here was unchanged. The same rolling hills, the same creek that ran under the same narrow bridge, the same oak grove where he'd spent countless afternoons as a child, pretending to be a famous musician performing for an audience of squirrels and birds. When Garth's pickup truck turned into the familiar gravel driveway, Marcus had to pull over for a moment to compose himself. The entrance to the property looked different. The rusted gates had been replaced with new ones that matched the original style, and someone had cleared the overgrown brush that had obscured the old stone markers that identified the property boundaries. But it was still the same driveway where he'd learned to ride a bicycle, where his father had taught him to drive the farm truck, where he'd stood on graduation day loading his car for the journey to Nashville while his mother watched from the front porch with a smile that didn't quite hide her sadness. Marcus took a deep breath and continued up the drive, following Garth toward the farmhouse that had been his childhood home. The transformation was remarkable. In the 3 weeks since Garth had purchased the property, contractors had been working steadily to restore the house to something approaching its original condition. The sagging porch had been reinforced and straightened, the faded paint had been stripped, and replaced with fresh white siding, and the broken shutters had been repaired and painted a deep green that Marcus remembered from his childhood. The wraparound porch, where his mother had spent summer evenings shelling peas and watching the sunset, was now solid and welcoming again. Someone had even replanted the flower boxes that had once held his mother's petunias and marigolds, though it was too late in the season for anything to be blooming. Garth was waiting by his truck as Marcus parked and slowly got out of his car. "What do you think?" he asked, his expression hopeful but cautious. Marcus stood for a long moment, taking in the sight of his childhood home, restored to something resembling its former glory. "It looks—" He paused, searching for words that could encompass the complexity of his emotions. "It looks the way I remember it, before everything fell apart. That was the goal. I had some photos from your neighbor Bill Patterson, and I wanted to be as accurate as possible." They walked toward the house together, and Marcus noticed that even small details had been attended to. The rope swing that had hung from the oak tree near the porch, the same swing where he'd spent countless childhood hours pretending to be a pirate or an astronaut, had been replaced with new rope, though the wooden seat was the same one his father had carved when Rebecca was small. "I kept as much of the original material as possible," Garth explained, noticing Marcus's attention to the swing. The contractors were able to restore most of the structural elements rather than replacing them entirely. The front door opened with the same familiar creak that Marcus remembered, though the hinges had obviously been oiled and adjusted. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. The hardwood floors had been refinished to their original warm honey color. The walls had been repainted in colors that matched his memories, and the rooms were filled with furniture that, while not original to the house, reflected the style and period of his family's time there. "How did you know what colors to use, what furniture to choose?" Marcus asked, running his hand along the banister of the staircase that led to the second floor. "Your sister Rebecca was very helpful. We had several phone conversations about family photos and her memories of how your mother had decorated the house. And Bill Patterson had some pictures from over the years." Marcus walked slowly through the rooms, remembering the life that had once filled these spaces. The kitchen looked almost exactly as it had during his childhood. The same style of cabinets, the same farmhouse sink beneath the window that looked out over the fields, even a similar kitchen table where his family had gathered for meals and homework sessions. "This is incredible," Marcus said quietly. "It's like stepping back in time." "There's something upstairs I think you'll want to see," Garth said, gesturing toward the staircase. Marcus's old bedroom had been restored with the same attention to detail as the rest of the house. The walls were painted the same blue he remembered, and there was a desk beneath the window where he'd done homework and written his first songs. But what stopped him in his tracks was the sight of his old guitar case, open on the bed, with the Yamaha acoustic guitar inside. "I thought you might want to see it again," Garth said from the doorway. Marcus approached the guitar slowly, as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. He lifted it from the case and was surprised to find that it had been restrung and professionally adjusted. The action was better than he remembered, and when he played a few chords, the tone was rich and clear. "You had it worked on?" "I took it to a luthier in Oklahoma City. Nothing major, just fresh strings, a proper setup, and some minor repair work on the bridge. It's a good instrument, Marcus." "Your mother chose well." Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and began playing, his fingers automatically finding chord progressions he'd practiced in this same room 15 years earlier. The muscle memory was still there, the comfort of holding an instrument that had been shaped by his teenage hands and dreams. Without conscious thought, he began playing one of the first songs he'd ever written, a simple melody about farm life and small-town dreams that he'd composed when he was 16. The lyrics came back to him as he played. "Down the gravel road where the oak trees grow, past the fields where the summer corn grows tall, there's a place that I used to know, where a boy could dream of having it all. When he finished, Marcus looked up to find Garth listening with the intense attention that had made him one of country music's most respected artists. "That's a beautiful song," Garth said. "Did you write that here?" "Right here in this room. It was one of my first attempts at songwriting. I thought it was the greatest song ever written at the time." Marcus smiled ruefully. "Now it sounds pretty naive." "It doesn't sound naive to me. It sounds honest. Sometimes that's more important than sophistication." Marcus played a few more songs, some he'd written in this room, others that had come later during his time in Nashville. As he played, he found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. There was something about being in this space, holding this particular guitar, that connected him to a version of himself he'd almost forgotten existed. "Marcus," Garth said when he paused between songs, "I want to show you something else." They walked to what had been his mother's office, which had been transformed into a kind of family archive. The walls were lined with framed photographs that documented the Henderson family's 30 years on the farm. Sarah and David as newlyweds, the children at various ages, family gatherings and holidays, farm activities and community events. But what caught Marcus's attention was a large framed display that contained some of his mother's letters and documents, arranged in a way that told the story of her struggle to keep the farm. Not the painful financial documents that had littered the desk when the house was abandoned, but older letters that showed her determination and hope. One letter, written to her sister in 1998, read in part, "David always said this land would provide for our children's children, and I still believe that's true. It might not happen in the way we originally planned, but I have faith that something good will come from the sacrifices we're making now." Another, written to Marcus during his first year in Nashville, said, "I know you feel guilty about leaving when things are difficult here, but you need to understand that your music is part of what this farm was meant to produce. We raised children, not just crops. And watching you follow your dreams is one of the greatest harvests we've ever had." Marcus stood reading his mother's words, with tears streaming down his face. "Where did you find these?" Rebecca had kept them. "She sent copies when I told her what I was planning to do with the house. Your mother documented a lot of her thoughts in letters to family members. Reading them helped me understand what kind of person she was, what she valued most. She never told me she felt this way about my music. When I left for Nashville, I thought she was disappointed in me for abandoning the farm. According to Rebecca, your mother was prouder of your musical accomplishments than you ever knew. She kept newspaper clippings about local shows you'd played, copies of songs you'd recorded, even reviews from Nashville publications when you started getting some recognition." Marcus walked to the window that looked out over the fields where his father had worked and died, where his mother had fought to preserve a legacy for her children. The view was different now. The fields had been cleared and replanted, the fence lines had been repaired, and in the distance he could see the framework of a new barn being constructed where the old one had collapsed. "What happens now?" he asked. "With the farm? With your foundation idea?" "That depends partly on you," Garth replied. "I've been working with lawyers and agricultural experts to develop a plan for supporting family farmers who face medical or financial crises. The idea is to provide temporary assistance, help with mortgage payments, medical bills, equipment repair, whatever families need to get through difficult periods without losing their land. And you want to base this operation here? I think your mother would appreciate the irony. The farm that was lost due to circumstances beyond her control becomes a place that helps other families avoid the same fate." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing the scope of what Garth was proposing. Finally, he said, "What would my role be in all this?" "Whatever you want it to be." You could help design the programs, work with families who need assistance, handle communications and outreach, or you could simply be a consultant, helping us understand the challenges that rural families face. End my music career? Doesn't have to end. Nashville will still be there, and this kind of work might actually give you new material to write about. Plus, there are recording studios in Oklahoma City. And with modern technology, you could work with Nashville producers and artists remotely. Marcus picked up his guitar again and played a few chords, thinking about the possibilities. For 10 years, he'd been focused on a single definition of success: record deals, radio play, fame. But sitting in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by evidence of his family's love and sacrifice, he was beginning to see other ways to measure a meaningful life. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Marcus, I want you to know that this isn't charity. If you decide to get involved, it would be because I genuinely believe you have something valuable to contribute. Not because I feel sorry for you or want to rescue you from Nashville. I understand. And Garth, thank you for all of this, for bringing the house back to life, for understanding what this place meant to my family, for giving me a chance to see it the way it used to be." That evening, Marcus sat on the front porch where his mother had spent so many summer evenings, holding his old guitar and watching the sun set over the restored fields. The air was crisp with approaching winter, but the porch was sheltered from the wind, and he found himself comfortable in the gathering darkness. He played quietly, running through songs he'd written over the years, hearing them differently in this environment than he had in Nashville clubs and coffee houses. Some of the songs seemed to make more sense here, rooted in the landscape and experiences that had shaped them. Others felt foreign, products of a life that had taken him far from his origins. As the stars began to appear in the clear Oklahoma sky, Marcus started working on a new song, words and melody emerging from some deep place he'd forgotten existed. It was a song about coming home, about the difference between running away from something and running towards something, about the way some places hold on to love even when the people who created it have moved on. He didn't know it yet, but it would become the first song he'd write for what would eventually become his breakthrough album. And it would be recorded right here on the Henderson farm, in a studio that Garth Brooks would build in the restored barn, as part of a foundation that would help hundreds of rural families over the years to come. But for now, it was just Marcus Henderson, sitting on his childhood porch with his first guitar, rediscovering the voice he'd been looking for in Nashville but had left behind in Oklahoma years earlier. 6 months later, the Henderson farm looked nothing like the abandoned property that Garth Brooks had purchased the previous October. The spring of 2019 had brought new life to the restored fields, where winter wheat was growing tall and green under the Oklahoma sun. The new barn stood proudly where the old one had collapsed, its red paint bright against the blue sky. And inside its modern structure, a state-of-the-art recording studio had been built where Marcus Henderson was putting the finishing touches on the album that would change his life. The farmhouse, now serving as headquarters for the Henderson Family Foundation, bustled with activity. Sarah Martinez, Rebecca's daughter and a recent college graduate with a degree in social work, had taken a job coordinating the foundation's family assistance programs. Bill Patterson, now in his late 70s, but still sharp as a tack, served as an unofficial liaison with the local farming community, helping identify families who needed support. And Marcus, who had made the decision to move back to Oklahoma permanently 3 months earlier, had found a purpose that combined his musical talents with his desire to honor his mother's memory. When he wasn't in the studio working on his own music, he was traveling throughout rural Oklahoma and neighboring states, visiting with farming families and documenting their stories through song. The foundation had already helped 12 families avoid foreclosure, paid medical bills for 3 farmers dealing with cancer diagnoses, and provided equipment loans to 5 families whose machinery had been destroyed by the severe storms that had swept through the region in April. Each family that received assistance also became part of an extended network of support, with recipients often helping other families who faced similar challenges. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The bitter, discouraged musician who had been working in a Nashville guitar store just 6 months earlier had been replaced by someone who had rediscovered not just his musical voice, but his sense of purpose and belonging. On this particular morning in late May, Marcus was sitting in the kitchen of the farmhouse, drinking coffee and reviewing applications for foundation assistance, when Garth arrived for one of his regular visits to the property. The country music superstar had been splitting his time between touring obligations and hands-on involvement with the foundation, but he never missed their weekly planning meetings. "How's the album coming along?" Garth asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot that always seemed to be brewing in the farmhouse kitchen. "Better than I ever imagined it could be," Marcus replied, and there was a lightness in his voice that hadn't been there during their first meeting in Nashville. "I finished the last track yesterday, a song about the Morrison family up in Atoka County. You remember, the ones who almost lost their dairy operation when Jim had his heart attack? The ones we helped with the hospital bills and temporary labor costs? That's them. Their story inspired one of the most honest songs I've ever written. There's something about working directly with these families, seeing their struggles and their strength firsthand, that brings out a different kind of truth in my music." Garth smiled, remembering his own journey from struggling songwriter to country music icon. The best songs always come from real experience. You can't fake authenticity. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," Marcus said, setting down his coffee cup and leaning back in his chair. "All those years in Nashville, I was trying to write songs that I thought the industry wanted, trying to fit into someone else's definition of what country music should sound like. But the songs I'm writing now, here on Mom's land, surrounded by the community she loved, these feel like the songs I was always meant to write." The kitchen door opened, and Sarah Martinez entered with a stack of mail and a bright smile that reminded both men of her grandmother, the woman whose farm had started it all. "Good morning, Uncle Garth," she said, using the honorary title that had developed naturally over the months of working together. The mail brought some good news. We got approved for the grant from the Department of Agriculture. That means we can expand the equipment loan program to cover 6 more counties. "That's fantastic," Garth said, genuinely pleased. The foundation had been working for months to secure federal grants that would allow them to help more families across a wider geographic area. "And, Marcus," Sarah continued, "I just got off the phone with someone from the Nashville scene. They want to do a feature story about your album and the foundation. Apparently, word is getting out about what you're doing here." Marcus looked surprised. "I thought we were trying to keep a low profile until the album was finished." "We were," Garth interjected. "But good news has a way of traveling. And honestly, Marcus, what you've created here deserves recognition. The music industry needs to hear these stories, and the farming community needs to know that someone is listening to their struggles and turning them into art." Over the past 6 months, Marcus had recorded 15 songs that told the stories of rural families throughout Oklahoma and Arkansas. Unlike his earlier work, which had focused on his own dreams and disappointments, these songs captured the voices of others. The widow trying to keep her husband's cattle ranch running, the young couple facing bankruptcy after a tornado destroyed their equipment, the elderly farmer watching his land get developed into a shopping center. But the songs weren't depressing or overly sentimental. Instead, they celebrated the resilience, humor, and community spirit that Marcus had rediscovered in his return to rural life. They were songs that acknowledged struggle without wallowing in it, that found hope in the midst of difficulty, that honored the dignity of hard work and family commitment. "I keep thinking about something Mom used to say," Marcus told them. "She always believed that everything happens for a reason, even when we can't see what that reason is at the time. Losing the farm was devastating for our family, but if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have gone to Nashville, and I wouldn't have learned what I needed to learn to come back and do this work. And I wouldn't have found this place," Garth added. "Sometimes the most important things in our lives come to us in ways we never could have planned or predicted." Sarah, who had been quietly organizing papers while the two men talked, looked up with a thoughtful expression. Grandma Sarah would have loved seeing what this place has become. She always said the land would provide for future generations, but I don't think even she could have imagined it would happen like this. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the gravel driveway. Through the kitchen window, they could see a pickup truck with Arkansas license plates and a family with 2 young children getting out and looking around the property with the mixture of hope and uncertainty that had become familiar to all of them. "That must be the Patterson family from Little Rock," Sarah said, consulting her appointment book. "They're the ones who contacted us about help with medical bills after their daughter's surgery." Marcus stood up, straightening his shirt and checking his appearance in the window's reflection. Over the past few months, he had become the foundation's primary contact for new families, using his own experience with rural struggles to put people at ease and help them understand that seeking assistance wasn't charity, but community support. "I'll go talk to them," he said. "Garth, do you want to sit in on the meeting? Sometimes it helps when families realize how seriously you take this work." "Absolutely. But Marcus, this is your show now. I'm just here to support what you've built." As they walked out to meet the Patterson family, Garth reflected on how much had changed since that October day when he'd first driven through the rusted gates of an abandoned farm. He had purchased the property looking for solitude and creative inspiration, but he had found something much more valuable: a way to use his success and resources to make a real difference in the lives of people who reminded him of his own family and community. The Patterson family consisted of parents who looked to be in their early 30s, a daughter of about 8 who was obviously recovering from recent surgery, and a son of perhaps 5 who stayed close to his mother's side. They approached the farmhouse with the careful dignity of people who were used to handling their own problems, but had finally reached a point where they needed help. Marcus introduced himself and Garth, then led the family to a comfortable seating area that had been set up on the front porch for such meetings. Over the past few months, he had learned that families were more comfortable discussing their situations in an informal outdoor setting rather than in an office environment that might feel too much like a bank or government agency. "Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Patterson," Marcus began, "we know it's not easy to reach out for help, and we want you to know that everything we discuss here is confidential. We're not here to judge your situation or make you feel bad about needing assistance. We're here because we understand that sometimes good families face circumstances that are beyond their control." Mrs. Patterson, a woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes that showed the strain of months of worry, spoke first. "Our daughter Emma had to have surgery to correct a heart defect. The operation was successful, thank God. But even with insurance, the medical bills have been more than we can handle. We've been farming for 10 years, and we've never missed a payment on anything until now. The bank has been patient," Mr. Patterson added, "but they can't wait forever. If we can't catch up on the mortgage payments in the next 60 days, we're going to lose the farm." Emma, the 8-year-old daughter, was listening to her parents with the serious expression of a child who understood more about adult problems than she should have. Her younger brother was playing with a toy truck, occasionally looking up at the adults with curiosity. Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentle but confident. "How much do you need to catch up on the mortgage payments?" $12,000, Mr. Patterson said quietly. It might as well be $12 million for all the chance we have of coming up with it. Garth and Marcus exchanged glances. $12,000 was well within the Foundation's guidelines for assistance, and the Patterson family clearly met all the criteria. They were working farmers facing a temporary crisis due to medical expenses. They had a history of financial responsibility, and they had a realistic plan for maintaining their payments once they got through the immediate crisis. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said, "I think we can help you with this. The Henderson Family Foundation provides exactly this kind of assistance. Temporary help for farming families who are facing financial difficulties due to medical emergencies or other circumstances beyond their control." Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. "Are you serious? You could actually help us save our farm?" "That's exactly what we're here for," Garth said. "But we want to do more than just write you a check. We want to make sure you have the support and resources you need to avoid this kind of crisis in the future." Over the next hour, they discussed the details of the assistance program. The foundation would pay the overdue mortgage payments directly to the bank, provide financial counseling to help the family better manage medical debt, and connect them with other farming families who had faced similar challenges. But they also talked about Emma's recovery, about the crops growing in the Patterson family's fields, about the son's upcoming start in kindergarten, about all the ordinary details of family life that made their struggle to keep their land so important. As the Patterson family prepared to leave, visibly lighter and more hopeful than they had been when they arrived, Emma approached Marcus with a shy smile. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "my daddy told me you're a musician. Do you ever play songs about kids?" Marcus smiled and sat down so he was at her eye level. "I do sometimes. In fact, I've been working on a song about a brave little girl who had to go to the hospital, but came home stronger than ever. Would you like to hear it?" Emma nodded eagerly, and Marcus began to sing softly. "There's a little girl with courage in her heart, facing things that might tear other folks apart. But she smiles through the tears, and she holds her head high, like a sunflower reaching for the sky." When he finished, Emma clapped enthusiastically, and even her usually serious father was smiling. "That's a beautiful song," Mrs. Patterson said. "Thank you for everything. For the financial help, but also for treating us like family instead of charity cases." As the Patterson family drove away, waving from their truck windows, Marcus and Garth stood on the porch, watching them go. "You know," Garth said, "I've had a lot of experiences in my career that I thought were meaningful. Sold-out stadiums, platinum albums, awards ceremonies. But I don't think any of them felt as important as what just happened here." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what Garth meant. "It's funny how life works out sometimes. I spent 10 years in Nashville trying to become famous, and I found something better instead. I found a way to use music to serve something bigger than myself." The sound of another vehicle approaching interrupted their reflection. This time, it was a white van with "Nashville Scene" painted on the side, followed by a car carrying what appeared to be a photographer and sound equipment. Marcus had agreed to the interview somewhat reluctantly, but Garth had convinced him that sharing their story might inspire others to create similar programs in their own communities. "Ready for this?" Garth asked, noting the tension that had suddenly appeared in Marcus's shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be. It still feels strange, having people want to interview me about something other than trying to get a record deal." The journalist who emerged from the van was a woman in her 40s named Jennifer Walsh, who had been covering the Nashville music scene for over 15 years. She had the easy confidence of someone who had interviewed everyone from struggling songwriters to global superstars. But as she approached the farmhouse, her expression showed genuine curiosity rather than the jaded professionalism that Marcus had encountered in many music industry interactions. "Mr. Brooks, Mr. Henderson," she said, shaking hands with both men. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview. I have to say, this story is unlike anything I've covered before. The combination of country music, agricultural advocacy, and family legacy, it's really compelling." They settled on the front porch for the interview, with the photographer capturing images of the restored farmhouse, the new barn, and the fields that stretched toward the horizon. As Jennifer set up her recording equipment, Marcus found himself thinking about how different this felt from the countless meetings he'd had with record label executives and music industry professionals over the years. "Let's start with you, Mr. Henderson," Jennifer said, pressing record on her digital device. "Can you tell me about your journey from Nashville songwriter to rural advocate? It's not a typical career path in the music industry." Marcus looked out over the fields where his father had worked and died, where his mother had fought to preserve a legacy for her children. "I think I spent 10 years in Nashville trying to become someone I wasn't," he said slowly. "I was writing songs that I thought the industry wanted, trying to fit into a mold that never quite worked for me. It wasn't until I came back here, to my family's land, that I remembered who I really was and what I really wanted to say through my music." "And what changed when you returned?" "Everything," Marcus replied without hesitation. "The stories I was hearing, the families I was meeting, the struggles and triumphs of rural life. These were the stories I'd grown up with, but I'd somehow forgotten they were worth telling. In Nashville, I was writing about heartbreak and honky-tonks and all the standard country music themes. Here, I was writing about real people facing real challenges, and the music that came out of that was more honest than anything I'd ever created." Jennifer turned to Garth. "Mr. Brooks, you could have bought any property you wanted anywhere in the world. What drew you specifically to this farm? And what inspired you to create the foundation?" Garth was quiet for a moment, formulating his response. "When I first walked through this house, I could feel the love that had existed here. It wasn't just an abandoned property. It was a family's dreams and struggles made tangible. Sarah Henderson had fought so hard to keep this place for her children, and when she couldn't, it seemed wrong to let all that love and sacrifice just disappear. So the foundation was always part of your plan." "Not initially," Garth admitted. "At first, I just wanted to restore the property, maybe use it as a retreat. But the more I learned about the Henderson family's story, the more I realized that this land could serve a purpose that honored their memory while helping other families avoid the same fate." Jennifer made notes on her pad, then looked back at Marcus. "Your album is generating significant buzz in Nashville, even though it's quite different from mainstream country music. How do you think the industry will respond to songs about farm foreclosures and medical debt?" Marcus smiled. "I've stopped worrying about how the industry will respond to my music. These songs are for the families who inspired them, for the communities that supported them, and for anyone who believes that music should tell the truth about people's lives. If that resonates with radio programmers and record executives, great. If it doesn't, I'll find other ways to get these stories to the people who need to hear them." "You sound much more confident than the typical struggling songwriter." "That's because I'm not struggling anymore," Marcus replied. "Not in the way that matters anyway. I have a purpose, a community, and work that feels meaningful. I'm making music that comes from an authentic place, and I'm part of something that's making a real difference in people's lives. That's success, regardless of whether it leads to platinum albums or Grammy nominations." See you. The interview continued for another hour, with Jennifer asking thoughtful questions about the foundation's operations, the challenges of supporting rural families, and the intersection of music and advocacy. Her photographer captured images of Marcus in the restored barn studio, of Garth walking through the fields with Bill Patterson, and of the farmhouse that had become a symbol of hope for struggling farming families throughout the region. As the Nashville scene team prepared to leave, Jennifer shook hands with both men again. "This story is going to have a significant impact," she told them. "There are a lot of people in Nashville and beyond who need to hear about what you're doing here. Just remember," Marcus said, "this isn't about us. It's about the families we're trying to help and the communities that are struggling to survive. If your story brings more attention to those issues, then we've accomplished what we set out to do." After the journalists left, Marcus and Garth sat on the porch as the sun began to set over the restored fields. It had been a long day, but a good one. They had helped the Patterson family secure their future, shared their story with someone who could help spread awareness of rural issues, and continued the work that had become their shared mission. "I never asked you," Marcus said as they watched the last light fade from the sky. "Do you ever miss it? The touring, the crowds, the excitement of performing for thousands of people?" Garth considered the question carefully. "I still tour occasionally, and I still love performing. But what we're doing here feels more important somehow. When I was at the height of my career, I was entertaining people, helping them forget their problems for a few hours. Here, we're helping people solve their problems permanently. There's a difference between distraction and transformation." "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," Marcus said. "For years, I thought success meant having my songs played on the radio, having fans sing along at concerts. But now, I'm starting to think success might be simpler than that. Maybe it's about using whatever talents you have to make the world a little better for the people around you." As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and smiled. "What is it?" Garth asked. "It's from Emma Patterson, the little girl whose family we helped today. She sent me a picture she drew of me playing guitar with a note that says, 'Thank you for saving our farm.'" "That," Marcus said, holding up the phone to show Garth the child's artwork, "feels like the kind of success I want to spend my life pursuing." 6 months later, Marcus Henderson's album, The Heart of the Land, would debut at number 3 on the country music charts, spawning 2 top 10 singles and earning critical acclaim for its authentic portrayal of rural American life. He would be invited to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, would win a Country Music Association Award for Best New Artist, and would be featured on the cover of Country Music magazine. But none of those achievements would feel as meaningful to him as the letter he received that same week from a farming family in Kansas, thanking the Henderson Family Foundation for helping them keep their land after a devastating tornado. Or the call from a young musician in Iowa, inspired by Marcus's story to return to his own rural community and start a similar program. The foundation would grow over the years, expanding to serve farming families across 12 states and helping hundreds of families avoid foreclosure, bankruptcy, and the loss of generational land. Marcus would continue to record albums and tour occasionally, but his primary focus would remain on the work that had brought him home to Oklahoma and given him a purpose larger than his own ambitions. And every evening, as he sat on the porch of the restored farmhouse where his mother had once dreamed of a future for her children, Marcus would remember her words about the land providing for future generations. She had been right, just not in the way anyone could have predicted. The fields around the Henderson farm would continue to produce wheat and corn and cattle, as they had for generations. But they would also produce something else: hope for families in crisis, music that told the truth about rural life, and proof that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to use it as a foundation for building a better future. In the end, Garth Brooks had found much more than the solitude and creative inspiration he had been seeking when he bought an abandoned farm in Oklahoma. He had found a way to use his success to serve others, a partnership that had enriched his own life immeasurably, and a legacy that would outlast any album or concert performance. And Marcus Henderson had discovered that coming home didn't mean giving up on his dreams. It meant finding dreams worthy of the sacrifices his family had made to give him the opportunity to dream at all. As the stars appeared over the Oklahoma plains, the same stars that had watched over generations of farmers and dreamers, the restored Henderson farm stood as a testament to the enduring power of love, community, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to build a better life for themselves and their children. The land, as Sarah Henderson had always believed, continued to provide.